A sharp gunshot ripped through the desert quiet at Vanguard military base, but it wasn't Emma Hayes who fired it. Sergeant Major Colt Brennan had just shot a single round into the clear California sky, his booming voice echoing across the live fire range like a storm in a canyon. "Hold, everyone, hold." 80 young male recruits froze instantly, their heads swiveling as one toward the observation tower. There stood Brennan, his rugged face twisted in a mask of disgust mixed with dramatic anger. The sun already beat down hard at 8 in the morning, transforming the sand underfoot into a shimmering trap of heat that would only intensify with the day. Advanced infantry training at Vanguard wasn't about comfort. It was designed to break those who thought they were already tough. Brennan descended the tower stairs 2 at a time, his boots hitting each metal step with deliberate force. 23 years in the Marine Corps had forged him into a hard, unyielding man who believed in the old ways. His medals told tales of Fallujah, Kandahar, and other classified locations. Every soldier knew his reputation: excellence through harshness, respect through fear. He moved through the formation with a slow, watchful patience, his eyes scanning faces until he stopped directly in front of Private Emma Hayes. She stood at attention, her uniform crisp despite the heat. Her brown hair was pulled back in a flawless bun, hiding any hint of the person beneath the rigid military code. At 5'6", she was noticeably smaller than most of the men around her, a fact that hadn't gone unnoticed during her 3 weeks at Vanguard. "You," Brennan barked, pointing with a thick finger. "What's your name?" "Private Hayes, Sergeant Major." "Hayes." He drew out the sound like a bad taste. "You think you belong here, Hayes?" "I'm here to train, Sergeant Major." "That's not what I asked." He stepped closer, lowering his voice, yet ensuring every person present could hear. "See, I've been doing this longer than you've been alive. And in my experience, some soldiers earn their place with blood and sweat. Then there are those diversity quotas, forced on us by politicians who want to feel good about themselves in Washington." A wave of quiet laughter spread through the ranks. Emma's face remained blank. Her gray-blue eyes held a distant stare, a 1,000-yard gaze that could mean shock or something entirely different. Brennan bent and picked up an M16A1 from near the equipment shed. The rifle was clearly antique, likely pulled from storage or salvaged from a unit that had upgraded decades ago. Rust speckled the barrel like a disease, and a visible crack ran along the wooden stock. He held it for a moment, then let it drop to the dirt at Emma's feet with a loud metallic clang that echoed across the silent range. "Pick it up, beauty queen." Emma looked at the weapon, then back at Brennan's face. "That's an order, Private." She slowly bent, both hands grasping the rifle as she lifted it from the dust. The weight felt familiar, the balance a little off from what modern soldiers trained with. But not wrong, just different. She brought it to port arms, the rust leaving orange streaks on her palms. "Now here's the deal," Brennan announced, loud enough for the entire company. "This private thinks she can stand with the best infantry soldiers in the U.S. military, so we're giving her a chance to prove it. If you can pass today's kill house drill with that rifle, Hayes, then maybe, just maybe, I'll start believing you're not just taking up space meant for someone who actually wants to fight." Captain Victoria Sterling watched from the observation deck, arms crossed. At 35, she was the first woman to command a company at Vanguard, a position she'd earned by being tougher, faster, and colder than any male colleague. Her nickname, Ice Queen, came not from cruelty, but from her absolute refusal to show weakness or ask for favors. When she saw Emma with the rusted weapon, a flicker of something like scorn crossed her face. "This is exactly why integration policies fail," Sterling muttered to the officer beside her. Gunnery Sergeant Rick Tex Morrison, a weapons specialist who'd spent 18 years shaping recruits into marksmen. They lower the standards, pretend everything's equal, and then wonder why nobody takes it seriously. Morrison nodded, his rugged features settling into a frown. "That rifle hasn't been fired in probably 15 years. Probably shouldn't be fired at all. If it doesn't jam after 3 rounds, I'll be amazed." Down on the range, Emma briefly met Brennan's eyes before returning her gaze to regulation neutrality. That fleeting contact held something the sergeant major couldn't quite place, and it annoyed him more than open defiance would have. "You got something to say, Hayes?" "No, Sergeant Major." "Good, because actions speak louder than words, don't they?" He turned to the formation. "Today's exercise, kill house compound clearance. Standard time limit is 8 minutes. Passing accuracy is 70%. I'm personally betting Hayes here doesn't hit 30%. He paused for effect. Any takers willing to bet against me? Silence was his only answer. Not one soldier stepped forward to defend the woman holding the rusted rifle. Before we dive deeper into what happened next, let me ask you something. Have you ever been completely underestimated? Maybe at work, maybe at school, maybe in life. That moment when someone mows at you and decides you're not capable before you even get a chance to prove yourself. If you're nodding right now, hit that subscribe button, because this channel tells stories of people who turned underestimation into their greatest weapon. We bring you real accounts of hidden excellence, of quiet warriors who changed everything when no one was watching. Don't miss what happens next. Lieutenant Blake Cordova emerged from the equipment building carrying a standard ammunition belt, but his expression hinted at a calculated move rather than routine. At 28, he was Vanguard's youngest officer in his position, a fact he credited to natural leadership, not the aggressive networking and political games his peers whispered about. He approached Emma with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Your ammunition, Private." He offered the belt, and Emma took it, her fingers sensing the weight before her mind processed the information. 20 rounds, the standard load for this drill was 40. Half the ammunition she needed. "Sir," she began, then stopped. Challenging an officer's decision in front of 80 witnesses wasn't a smart move. She clipped the belt to her gear and said nothing more. "Problem, Hayes?" Cordova's smile widened. "Or are you going to claim you need special accommodation already?" "No problem, sir." "Excellent." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Hayes, just so you know, I've assigned you to Fire Team Delta. They're waiting for you by the armory." Fire Team Delta. Emma kept her face neutral, but everyone on that range knew what Delta meant. It was where they put soldiers who'd failed basic qualifications, those one mistake away from being recycled or discharged. The reject squad. Being assigned there wasn't just an insult, it was a public announcement that she'd already been judged and found lacking. Private Danny Torres stood with 3 other soldiers near the armory, his young face a mix of resignation and embarrassment. At 23, he'd already failed the advanced course twice, not from lack of effort, but from consistently crumbling under pressure. When he saw Emma approaching with the rusted M16, something like pity crossed his features. "Ma'am," he said quietly as she joined them. He wasn't supposed to call her ma'am, they were both privates, but an instinctive respect in the word seemed to come from somewhere deeper than military rule. "That rifle, it hasn't been fired in years. The firing pin might be broken." Emma turned the weapon in her hands, her fingers gliding along the receiver with a familiarity that would be invisible to anyone not specifically watching. She pulled the charging handle back smoothly, checking the chamber in a motion so fluid it could be mistaken for simple inspection, rather than the practiced assessment of someone who'd handled thousands of weapons in every condition imaginable. The bolt carrier moved with resistance. Years of neglect made it sticky, but it moved. "It's intact," she said, her voice soft. "Just needs cleaning." Torres looked at her with new interest. "You've worked with M16s before." Maybe it was a neutral answer, perfectly non-committal, the kind that shut down questions without being openly evasive. But the way her thumb had automatically checked the extractor, the way her eye had instantly aligned with the sight to verify true zero, the way her breathing had shifted into a particular rhythm without conscious thought, these were subtle clues too easily missed by most observers. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb, the base armorer, watched this exchange from his window 20 yards away. At 36, he'd seen thousands of soldiers handle weapons. He could tell the difference between someone who'd taken a basic course and someone who'd spent real time in combat. The private holding that rusted rifle moved like the latter, but her service record showed standard training, basic infantry school, then straight to Vanguard. Nothing exceptional. Nothing that explained the ingrained muscle memory he was witnessing. The march to the kill house compound took 15 minutes, long enough for the desert sun to begin its serious work. Heat shimmered in visible waves from the sand, and sweat began to darken the backs of uniform. The compound itself was a permanent fixture at Vanguard, a maze of plywood walls and metal frames designed to simulate urban combat with pop-up targets appearing from 15 to 300 yards away. It was where careers were made or broken, where the difference between competent soldiers and exceptional operators became clear. The observation deck filled quickly. 50-plus personnel crowded the elevated platform that offered clear views into the compound. Major General Sarah Reeves arrived exactly on schedule, her 2-star rank making everyone stand a little straighter. At 52, she'd commanded combat operations for 15 years before moving to her current role overseeing training facilities. She had a reputation for seeing through pretense to identify true capability. She positioned herself at the front of the deck, binoculars already in hand. "What's the situation, Sergeant Major?" Her voice held the authority of someone who expected complete honesty, not filtered report. Brennan snapped to attention. "Standard killhouse drill, ma'am, testing the new private's capabilities under realistic conditions." Reeves studied the scene below, Emma checking her rifle, the reject squad looking nervous, the crowd of observers gathering like spectators at an execution. "That weapon looks like it belongs in a museum, not a live-fire exercise." "The private didn't object, ma'am." "I see." Reeves lifted her binoculars, focusing on Emma. For several seconds she watched the young woman's stance, the specific distribution of weight on the balls of her feet, not flat-footed, the way her eyes scanned even when seemingly looking at nothing in particular. Then she lowered the binoculars, her expression revealing nothing. "Carry on." The betting pool started immediately. Sergeant First Class Deshaun Williams, the range safety officer, kept an informal tally on his tablet. $200 on Hayes failing completely. 80 on her finishing but missing accuracy standard. 20 on her passing but taking longer than regulation time. Not $1 on her actually succeeding under the given parameters. Private Jake Bulldog Matthews, who'd earned his nickname from aggressive talk rather than combat, leaned against the observation rail, with a grin that showed too many teeth. "Hey, beauty queen," he called down. "Need someone to carry your purse while you're in." Laughter rippled through the observers. Emma didn't turn her head. She simply continued inspecting her weapon, her fingers now working over the trigger mechanism, feeling for resistance that would indicate degraded internal springs. The trigger broke cleanly at approximately 4.5 pounds, well within acceptable limits, despite the external rust. Master Sergeant Owen Drake stood apart from the younger soldiers, his weathered face showing the particular exhaustion of too many years witnessing too much. At 45 he'd trained over 3,000 soldiers, and his time in Vietnam had given him perspectives the younger generation couldn't access. He watched Emma with the same detached assessment he'd learned to apply to every recruit. No expectations, no assumptions, just observation. "I've trained thousands," he said to Gunnery Sergeant Linda Cho, the female drill instructor documenting the exercise with an official camera. "Women don't have the aggression trigger needed for combat shooting. They can qualify on a flat range, sure, but under pressure and chaos they hesitate. It's biological, not personal." Cho kept filming without responding. She'd heard variations of this speech for her entire 8 years at Vanguard, and experience had taught her that arguing achieved nothing. Results spoke louder than debate. Lieutenant Cordova climbed onto the observation deck, his expression carefully neutral. He positioned himself where he could clearly see both the compound and General Reeves, always aware of who was watching. When Captain Sterling joined the observers, Cordova moved closer to her. "Captain, I've prepared secondary drills if this one proves inadequate," he said quietly. "We need comprehensive data for the evaluation reports." Sterling nodded once, her ice blue eyes fixed on Emma below. "Good thinking, though I doubt we'll need them. This will be over quickly." Down at the compound entrance, Emma clipped the ammunition belt to her gear, and performed one final chamber check. 20 rounds for a drill designed for 40. The math was simple, but the implications were complex. She'd need to hit 70% accuracy, 14 targets minimum, with bullets to spare for inevitable misses or follow-up shots. No room for error, no second chances, the exact opposite of what Brennan expected. The drill's buzzer system squawked to life. Cordo's voice boomed through the speakers with unnecessary volume. "Private Hayes, you have 8 minutes to clear the compound. Targets will appear at random intervals and distances. Hostile targets must be neutralized with center mass hits. Civilian targets must not be engaged. Your time begins in 30 seconds. Danny Torres and the other members of Fire Team Delta clustered near Emma, their nervousness obvious. They knew they were supposed to support her, but the situation felt impossible, designed for failure. "We're going to get destroyed," Torres whispered. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, we're not exactly the best backup you could have." Emma looked at him directly for the first time, and something in her gray-blue eyes made him stop talking. It wasn't anger or disappointment. It was more like recognition, the kind of look that said she'd been exactly where he was, feeling exactly what he was feeling, and she'd found a way through. "Trust me," she said. 2 words, but they carried a weight that simple encouragement shouldn't have. "Stay tight. Watch your corners and move when I move. We're going to be fine." The buzzer sounded. 8 minutes started counting down on the observation deck displays. Emma moved forward into the compound, her team following. Immediately she did something unexpected. She went left, while standard military teaching dictated moving right. The choice seemed random to most observers, but those with tactical training recognized it as the harder path, the one with less cover and worse sight lines. "She's going to get pinned in the first 30 seconds, Morrison muttered, his fingers drumming nervously against the rail. The first target popped up at 50 yards, a hostile silhouette emerging from behind a plywood barrier. Emma's rifle came up smoothly, her stance perfect despite the unfamiliar weapon. Her finger found the trigger, began the press, and the rifle jammed. The round chambered but failed to fire, a mechanical failure that sent a ripple of satisfied murmurs through the observation deck. Exactly what everyone had predicted. But Emma's response wasn't panic or frustration. Her hands moved through an immediate action drill with mechanical precision. Tapped the magazine to ensure it was seated. Racked the charging handle to clear the chamber. Observe the ejected round. Check for obstruction. Reload. The entire sequence took 1.2 seconds, faster than most soldiers could execute it with a functioning weapon, faster than the observers could process what they were seeing. The target was still visible. Emma fired. Center mass. Perfect hit. "Wait, what?" Matthews leaned forward, his grin faltering. "How did she?" A second target appeared at 100 yards, this one moving sideways across a gap between walls. Emma tracked it, her barrel moving with fluid patience, and fired at the exact moment the target's momentum shifted direction. Another center mass hit. The murmurs on the observation deck changed tone slightly. Uncertainty crept into the dismissiveness. Webb the armorer lifted his own binoculars, studying Emma's technique with newfound focus. The way she was leading moving targets, the split-second adjustments for distance and wind, the breathing pattern synchronized with each trigger press. This wasn't basic marksmanship. This was something else entirely. A third target popped up at 150 yards, partly hidden by a barrier that left maybe 6 inches exposed. Standard teaching said to wait for a better shot, to save ammunition when the target was marginal. Emma waited 3 seconds, completely motionless, then fired through the gap. The target went down. "That's advanced marksmanship," Morrison said, no longer trying to hide his surprise. He turned to Brennan, who stood with arms crossed, his expression unreadable behind mirrored sunglasses. "Where did she learn that?" Brennan said nothing, but his jaw was tight. 4 minutes and 37 seconds after entering the compound, Emma and her team emerged from the exit. The drill's automatic scoring system displayed the results on every screen. 17 hits out of 18 rounds fired. Accuracy 94%. 0 civilian targets engaged. Time elapsed 4 minutes 37 seconds. Course record beaten by 3 minutes and 14 seconds. Silence fell across the observation deck like a physical weight. Then chaos. "No way!" Someone shouted. "That's impossible." "She got lucky," another voice insisted, already seeking explanations that preserved their existing view. "That rifle shouldn't even fire." "Run the numbers again," Matthews demanded, pointing at the scoring display. "There has to be an error." But the numbers didn't change. Emma Hayes, the diversity quota, the beauty queen, the private who wasn't supposed to last a week at Vanguard, had just shattered the facility's long-standing record with a weapon that should have been scrapped years ago. General Reeves slowly lowered her binoculars, her expression thoughtful rather than shocked. She'd seen combat excellence before, commanded operators who performed under impossible conditions, and she recognized the particular quality of Emma's performance. It wasn't luck or adrenaline. It was trained competence, the kind that only came from thousands of hours of repetition. Emma emerged from the compound and walked directly to Staff Sergeant Webb, extending the rusted M16 toward him. "Firing pin needs replacement," she said quietly. Expector spring is weak. Barrel has approximately 3 inches of fouling that should be removed before anyone else uses this weapon. Webb took the rifle automatically, his eyes widening as he processed her assessment. He'd been an armorer for 18 years, and his inspection protocol would have checked exactly those 3 systems. But Emma had identified the issues by feel alone, through subtle variations in how the weapon cycled, through degradations that shouldn't have been noticeable to someone firing it for the first time. "You're right on all 3, he said, turning the rifle over. "How did you know without taking it apart?" Emma's answer was as brief as everything else about her. "I could feel it." Then she walked away, leaving Webb staring after her with the kind of puzzlement that often precedes a fundamental rethinking. Captain Sterling descended from the observation deck, her heels striking the metal stairs with sharp precision. She'd built her entire career on being the exception, the woman who succeeded by being undeniably better than her male counterpart. Emma's performance threatened that narrative in ways Sterling was only beginning to understand. "Private Hayes," she called out, her voice carrying command authority. "Hold position." Emma stopped, turned, came to attention. "Man." Sterling walked a slow circle around her, examining her uniform, her posture, her expression. "You got lucky. One good run doesn't make you an operator." "Yes, ma'am. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Sterling moved closer, her voice dropping to something more personal than official. "There are people here who've spent years earning respect. You think you can show up and shortcut that process with one drill?" "No, ma'am." "Then what exactly do you think you proved today?" For a moment Emma held Sterling's gaze directly, and something passed between them that was more complex than simple confrontation. Then Emma's eyes returned to regulation neutrality. "Nothing, ma'am. Just completed the assigned task." It was the perfect answer, respectful, non-confrontational, impossible to criticize, and it frustrated Sterling more than defiance would have. She dismissed Emma with a gesture and returned to the observation deck, her mind already composing the report she'd file about today's event. Sergeant Major Brennan hadn't moved from his position. He stood like a statue of rigidity, watching Emma with an intensity that suggested he was trying to see through her skin to whatever was hiding underneath. When she walked past him toward the barracks, he finally spoke. "Hayes, my office." "Now." They walked in silence across the compound, the afternoon heat building towards its peak. Brennan's office was a monument to military efficiency. Clean desk, regulation furnishings, walls covered with commendations and photographs from deployment spanning 3 decades. He closed the door and gestured for Emma to remain standing at attention. "Where did you train before this?" His voice was controlled but carried an edge that suggested the control required effort. "Basic training, then infantry school, then here, Sergeant Major. Standard pipeline. Your file shows weapons qualification scores were mediocre at best. Now suddenly you're a shooting expert. Plus." He pulled her service record from a drawer, flipping through pages that showed exactly what he described, adequate but unexceptional performance. "You want to explain that?" "Maybe I'm a late bloomer, Sergeant Major." Brennan's fist came down on the desk, not hard enough to damage anything, but loud enough to make his point. "Don't play games with me, Private. I've been doing this for 23 years. I know the difference between natural talent and trained expertise. What you did today wasn't beginner's luck." Emma kept her eyes fixed on the wall behind his head, her expression revealing nothing. "I completed the assigned drill to standard, Sergeant Major. If there's another drill you'd like me to attempt, I'm ready." The words were correct, the tone appropriate, but something in the delivery made Brennan feel like he was the one being evaluated, rather than conducting the evaluation. He studied her for a long moment, trying to find the crack that would let him see inside, but Emma Hayes presented a surface as smooth as polished steel. "Dismissed," he finally said. "But Private, this isn't over. Not by a long shot." "Yes, Sergeant Major." Emma executed a perfect about-face, and left, her footsteps measured and unhurried. Brennan waited until she was gone before picking up his desk phone and dialing an internal extension. "Morrison, it's Brennan. I need you to design another drill, something hard. I want to see what happens when Hayes faces a real challenge." Whatever response Morrison gave made Brennan nod with satisfaction. "Good. Set it up for tomorrow morning. And Morrison, make it something she can't possibly prepare for." Outside, Emma walked back toward the barracks where Fireteam Delta was celebrating their unexpected success with the kind of enthusiasm that suggested they still couldn't quite believe what had happened. Danny Torres saw her approaching and jogged over, his face split by a grin. "Ma'am, that was incredible. How did you—" "It was a team effort," Emma interrupted gently. "You all did exactly what you needed to do. But the shots, the timing, the way you handled that jam—" Torres trailed off, looking at her with a mix of admiration and confusion. "Have you done this before, like in combat or something?" Emma's answer was the same non-answer she'd given Webb and Brennan. "I just follow training protocol, same as everyone else." But her hands, as she spoke, moved through an unconscious sequence, adjusting her belt at exactly the point where a tactical vest would sit, her weight shifting into the balanced stance combat veterans adopt without thinking, her eyes performing a constant scan pattern that mapped exits, threats and tactical advantages. These were clues left by muscle memory that couldn't be completely suppressed, visible to anyone who knew what they were looking for. Staff Sergeant Webb was one of those people. He'd followed Emma from the range to observe her interactions with her team, and what he saw confirmed his growing suspicion that Private Hayes was more than her service record suggested. The way she moved through space, the way she positioned herself for situational awareness, the way her hands never strayed far from where weapons would typically be carried. These weren't behaviors taught in basic infantry training. These were combat reflexes, so deeply ingrained they were automatic. He made a note to review her file more carefully. Something didn't add up, and in his experience, when service records and observed behavior contradicted each other, the explanation was usually either fraud or classification. He suspected the latter. The rest of the afternoon passed in deceptive calm. Emma completed her assigned duties with the same quiet efficiency that had marked her entire time at Vanguard, cleaning weapons, maintaining equipment, studying tactical manuals that most soldiers skimmed rather than memorized. But word of her kill house performance spread through the base like wildfire, carried by the 80 witnesses from the observation deck. By dinner time, everyone at Vanguard had heard some version of the story. The details changed with each retelling. The rifle was even rustier, the targets were harder, the time was even faster, but the core remained consistent. The quiet private everyone had dismissed had just embarrassed the facility's best scores. Private Alex Chen, a tech-savvy recruit with a gift for pattern recognition, spent his evening studying footage from the kill house cameras. The security system recorded everything for training analysis, and Chen had access through his assignment to communication. What he saw on the screen made him pause the footage and rewind 3 times, trying to match what he was seeing with what he knew about standard infantry doctrine. Emma's footwork was wrong, not incorrect, wrong in the sense that it didn't match what was taught in basic training. It was tighter, more economical, with specific angle approaches that optimized for speed and protection in ways standard doctrine sacrificed for simplicity. Chen had seen this footwork before, briefly in a classified training video he'd accidentally accessed while setting up a system upgrade. The video had been labeled Tier 1 CQB Doctrine and had been removed from the server within hours. He made a note to himself and said nothing to anyone, but his eyes followed Emma differently after that, with the particular attention of someone who'd glimpsed a pattern they couldn't yet explain. Night fell across Vanguard with the suddenness typical of the desert, temperatures dropping 20 degrees in the first hour after sunset. Emma sat alone in the barracks common area, cleaning the rifle she'd been issued to replace the rusted. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, each motion economical and precise, as she worked in complete silence while other soldiers laughed and talked around her. Private Maria Gonzalez, one of 3 female recruits in the current training cycle, watched Emma from across the room with barely concealed curiosity. At 21, Gonzalez had spent her entire time at Vanguard, trying to prove she belonged, trying to be tough enough, fast enough, and good enough to earn respect from men who assumed she'd fail. Seeing Emma succeed so completely had sparked something like hope in Gonzalez's chest, though she wasn't quite sure what to do with the feeling. Finally, she worked up the courage to approach Private Hayes. Emma looked up, her expression neutral. "Gonzalez, I just wanted to say what you did today was amazing." The words came out rushed, genuine. "I've never seen anyone shoot like that. How did you learn?" "Practice." One word, nothing more. But something in Emma's eyes suggested depth beneath the simple answer. Layers of experience, training and time that a single word couldn't contain. Gonzalez waited for elaboration that never came. "Could you maybe show me sometime some of what you know?" Gonzalez's voice carried hope and vulnerability in equal measure.
I'm trying to qualify expert before the end of cycle, and I could really use the range opens at 600, Emma said. If you're there, I'll show you. It wasn't enthusiasm or warm encouragement, but it was a yes, and that was enough. Gonzalez thanked her and retreated, feeling like she'd just received something more valuable than she could immediately quantify. Emma returned to cleaning her weapon, but her mind was calculating probabilities and contingencies unrelated to rifle maintenance. Today's performance had been necessary, but dangerous, a forced revelation that compromised the anonymity she'd maintained for 3 weeks. She'd come to Vanguard for specific reasons, and drawing attention to herself made those reasons harder to accomplish. But the alternative, deliberately failing the drill, would have been worse. It would have validated every dismissive assumption, confirmed every bias, and more importantly, it would have been dishonest in a way that violated something fundamental in Emma Hayes. Whatever else she was, whatever other deceptions she maintained, she couldn't bring herself to pretend to be less competent than she actually was, not when it mattered, not when people were watching. So she'd perform to standard, and now she'd deal with the consequences. The attention would be manageable, the questions would be deflected, and the mission would continue, even if the parameters had shifted slightly. Lieutenant Cordova sat in his private quarters staring at a laptop screen that showed information not officially accessible to someone at his rank. His security clearance allowed him to view basic service records, but what he was looking at now required access to classified databases that he'd obtained through connections he was careful never to discuss openly. Emma Hayes's official file was exactly as Brennan had described: standard recruitment, standard training, standard qualifications, but there were gaps in the timeline that didn't quite make sense. Periods of several months labeled simply as training, with no additional detail. He'd seen gaps like this before in the files of soldiers who'd done work that couldn't be officially acknowledged. The 7-month disappearance during what should have been advanced infantry training, the lack of specific unit assignments during key periods, the medical records that referenced injuries without explaining how they'd been sustained. These were red flags that suggested Emma Hayes had been doing something other than what her official record claimed. Cordova made a decision. Tomorrow morning he'd submit a request for expanded background verification through channels that would take several days to process, but would eventually reveal whatever was being hidden. If Hayes was exactly what she appeared to be, an exceptionally talented soldier who'd somehow escaped earlier notice, then the verification would confirm it, and he could adjust his approach accordingly. But if she was something else, something that might complicate his own carefully constructed position at Vanguard, then he needed to know before things progressed further. He drafted the request, encrypted it properly, and sent it through the system. Then he closed the laptop and allowed himself a smile. Whatever Emma Hayes was hiding, he'd know soon enough. And knowledge in his experience was the most valuable currency in any organization. Miles away from Vanguard, in an office building that officially didn't exist, Colonel Raymond Pierce reviewed the same security footage Alex Chen had studied. Pierce's clearance level was considerably higher than a corporal's, and his access to classified information was essentially unlimited within his operational sphere. He'd been tracking Emma Hayes since her arrival at Vanguard, not because she'd done anything to warrant investigation, but because her name had triggered an automated alert in a system that monitored thousands of potential security concerns. The alert was simple. Emma Hayes, supposedly a standard infantry private, was using movement patterns and techniques that matched Tier 1 operational doctrine. The system had flagged 14 specific instances over her 3 weeks at Vanguard, each one subtle enough to escape human notice, but distinct enough to register on algorithmic pattern matching. Pierce had served alongside Task Force Black operators during his deployment to Fallujah. He'd seen them work, studied their methods, and learned to recognize the particular way they moved through space and engaged with threats. What he was watching on this security footage looked exactly like that, which meant Emma Hayes was either an extraordinarily gifted imposter, or she was exactly who the system thought she might be. He picked up a secure phone and dialed a number that connected to an office where phones didn't ring. They simply displayed incoming calls on silent screens for people to notice when they were ready. "This is Pierce. I need verification on a name. Emma Hayes, currently assigned to Forward Operating Base Vanguard. Cross-reference with Task Force Black personnel records." The response took 30 seconds, which was fast by the standards of classified verification. When the voice returned, it carried a weight that confirmed Pierce's suspicion. "That name is flagged at Level 7 classification. No information available without direct authorization from JSOC command. Level 7. Pierce thanked the voice and disconnect. There were only 5 levels of standard classification in the military, which meant Emma Hayes wasn't just classified. She was deep black, part of operations that officially never happened, conducted by units that officially didn't exist. He made another note to himself and continued watching the footage. Whatever Emma Hayes was doing at Vanguard, it wasn't standard training. It was something else, something that Level 7 classification protected. And Pierce, despite his high clearance and extensive experience, knew better than to dig deeper without authorization. Some secrets stayed secret for very good reasons. Back at Vanguard, Emma finally finished her weapon maintenance and returned to her bunk. The barracks were quiet now, most soldiers already asleep in preparation for the 500 hours wake-up that would come regardless of how tired they were.
She lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, and allowed herself to think through everything that had happened today. The drill had gone exactly as she'd anticipated. Brennan's attempt to humiliate her had backfired, but the real success wasn't the performance itself. It was that she'd maintained her cover while demonstrating enough competence to explain any future excellence that might become necessary. The line she walked was razor thin. Too much skill and she'd blow her cover completely. Too little and she'd fail to accomplish the actual mission that had brought her to Vanguard in the first place. That mission was simple in concept, but complex in execution. Identify the security leak that was feeding classified training information to hostile intelligence services. For the past 3 weeks she'd been monitoring communications, observing personnel, mapping relationships and access patterns. The leak was here at Vanguard, and it was someone with sufficient clearance and opportunity to compromise operational planning. Lieutenant Cordova was her primary suspect, but she didn't have proof yet. Just patterns, correlations, the kind of circumstantial evidence that would never hold up in a military tribunal. She needed something concrete, and that meant staying in position long enough to catch him in the act. Today's performance had complicated that timeline. Tomorrow would bring increased scrutiny, more questions, possibly background checks that could reveal things she needed to keep hidden. She'd have to be more careful, more controlled, more perfectly ordinary in every way that didn't absolutely require excellence. Her fingers unconsciously traced the edge of the tattoo on her lower back, the geometric pattern that carried meanings only a handful of people alive could fully interpret. Task Force Black had been disbanded 3 years ago after the Syria operation went catastrophically wrong. Officially, every member of the unit had been killed in action. Unofficially, Emma had survived, pulled from the rubble of a compound that was supposed to have been empty, and spent 6 months recovering from injuries that should have been fatal. When she'd healed enough to function, she'd made a choice. Stay dead and hunt the people who'd betrayed her unit, or return to official service and spend the rest of her career answering questions about operations she wasn't authorized to discuss. She'd chosen the first option, and for 3 years she'd been a ghost, operating through false identities and unofficial channels, following a trail of corruption that led through military installations, defense contractors and levels of command that should have been trustworthy. The trail had led her here, to Vanguard, to this bunk, to the moment when maintaining her cover required demonstrating skills she'd spent 3 years trying to hide. The contradiction was ironic enough to make her smile in the darkness. She'd become invisible by being too visible to ignore, had maintained her secret by showing just enough truth to explain the lies. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Tomorrow would require new calculations. But for tonight, Emma Hayes allowed herself to rest in the knowledge that she'd cleared one obstacle and positioned herself for the next phase. Outside, under a desert sky scattered with stars too numerous to count, forward operating base Vanguard slept. But in offices and barracks and secure facilities, people were thinking about Private Emma Hayes with varying levels of interest and concern. Some saw a threat, some saw a mystery, and one person somewhere in this facility saw a problem that needed to be eliminated before she could expose truths that were meant to stay buried. The next morning would bring all of these concerns into collision, and Emma would be ready. Dawn arrived at 5:30, with the mechanical precision of military routine. Emma was already awake, had been for an hour, running through mental preparations while the barracks slowly stirred to life around her. She'd learned long ago that sleep was a luxury to be managed rather than a necessity to be indulged, and 4 hours was sufficient when properly trained. Private Maria Gonzalez appeared at the range at 600, exactly as promised. Emma was already there, having used the previous 30 minutes to set up targets at varying distances and check the condition of the training ammunition. When Gonzalez approached, slightly breathless from her jog across the compound, Emma simply handed her a rifle and pointed to the first firing position. "Stance first," Emma said. "Everything else builds from foundation." For the next hour, she walked Gonzalez through fundamentals that most instructors covered in minutes, but Emma broke down into components: foot placement relative to target direction, hip rotation for recoil management, shoulder pocket positioning to maintain sight picture through multiple shots. She spoke in short, precise sentences, demonstrating rather than lecturing, and Gonzalez absorbed the information with visible hunger. By 700, Gonzalez was hitting targets at 150 yards with consistency she'd never achieved before. Not perfection. That would take months, but improvement dramatic enough to be unmistakable. "How do you know all this?" Gonzalez finally asked during a reload. "They didn't teach us this level of detail in basic." Emma's answer was characteristically minimal. Different instructors teach different methods. Find what works for you. But the way she'd broken down each skill, the specific language she'd used to describe proper technique, the small adjustments she'd made to Gonzalez's grip and stance, these suggested teaching experience that went far beyond peer-to-peer knowledge share. This was instructor-level expertise, the kind developed through formal training programs and hundreds of hours working with students. Gunnery Sergeant Morrison arrived at the range at 7:15 for his regular morning inspection, and stopped short when he saw Emma working with Gonzalez. He watched for several minutes, his experienced eye analyzing the instruction. What he witnessed bothered him in ways he couldn't immediately articulate. Private Hayes was teaching advanced marksmanship theory that Morrison himself had only learned during his specialized weapons instructor course at Quantico. When the session ended and Gonzalez departed with visible excitement, Morrison approached Emma directly. "Private Hayes, I need you to demonstrate something for me." Emma came to attention automatically. "Yes, Gunny." Morrison pulled a rifle from the range equipment locker, not the rusted M16 from yesterday, but a standard-issue weapon in good condition, and a folded strip of cloth from his pocket. "I want you to field strip this rifle completely, then reassemble it blindfolded." It was a challenge designed to be nearly impossible. Even experienced armorers took 3 to 4 minutes to disassemble and rebuild an M16 without vision, relying entirely on tactile feedback and muscle memory. For a private with supposedly standard training, the task should be beyond capability. Emma accepted the cloth without hesitation and tied it around her eyes with hands that showed no tremor. Then she picked up the rifle and began. Her fingers moved with surgical precision, finding pins and springs and components through touch alone. She worked in complete silence. No wasted motion, no hesitation. Each movement flowed directly into the next, as though she'd performed this exact sequence thousands of times. The rifle came apart in her hands like a puzzle she'd solved so many times it had become meditation rather than challenge. 38 seconds. The completely disassembled weapon lay on the table before her in perfect organizational order. Receiver, bolt, carrier, firing pin, cam pin, charging handle, buffer, spring, trigger assembly, magazine release, each component positioned exactly where an armorer would place it for inspection. Morrison checked his stopwatch twice, certain he'd misread it. 38 seconds was faster than he could have managed it. Faster than most of his specialized instructors could have managed it. It was the kind of speed that suggested this private had built and rebuilt rifles so many times that her hands knew the process better than her conscious mind. "How?" Morrison's question came out sharper than he'd intended. "How is that possible?" Emma removed the blindfold and began reassembling the weapon, her movements now visible but no less efficient. "Practice, Gunny. Nobody gets that fast with practice alone. That's thousands of repetitions. When did you log that kind of time?" The rifle clicked together with mechanical finality. Emma performed a function check, verified the weapon was properly assembled, and handed it back to Morrison. "Permission to return to my duties, Gunny." Morrison wanted to press to demand answers that made sense of what he'd just witnessed, but something in Emma's stance reminded him of operators he'd worked with during his deployment to Afghanistan.
Soldiers who didn't explain themselves because their work was classified at levels that made explanation illegal. He made a decision that would haunt him later. He let her go. Dismissed. Private. But Hayes, we're going to talk about this again. Yes, Gunny. Emma walked away, leaving Morrison holding a rifle and a growing certainty that Private Hayes was not remotely what her service record suggested. He pulled out his phone and made a call he'd been considering since yesterday. Webb, it's Morrison. That private from yesterday, Hayes. I just watched her field strip a rifle blindfolded in 38 seconds. We need to talk. The conversation that followed lasted 20 minutes and ended with both men agreeing to share their observations with higher command. Something was wrong with the official story, and wrong in a way that suggested either fraud or classification. Given the competence they'd witnessed, classification seemed more likely. The morning progressed through standard training evolutions, physical conditioning, tactical lectures, equipment maintenance. Emma participated with the same quiet efficiency that had marked her previous 3 weeks at Vanguard, drawing no additional attention to herself, answering questions with minimal words, existing in the careful space between competence and excellence. But eyes followed her now. Danny Torres watched her during formation with barely concealed curiosity. Alex Chen studied her movement patterns during the tactical exercise. Captain Voss, the physician assistant, made a note to review her medical records during his lunch break. And Colonel Pierce, watching via security cameras from his office 300 meters away, continued compiling evidence that would eventually require official action. At 1 o'clock, Lieutenant Cordova received a response to his background verification request. The message was brief and deeply unsettling. Request denied. Subject file classified level 7. No access authorized without JSOC approval. Further inquiries will be logged and investigated. Level 7 classification. Cordova sat back in his chair, his mind racing through implications. He'd submitted background checks on hundreds of soldiers over his career, and he'd never once encountered a level 7 denial. Standard classified operations were level 3 or 4. Even most special operations work was level 5. Level 7 meant black budget, deniable operations. Units that officially didn't exist, which meant Private Emma Hayes was either the most successful imposter in military history, or she was something so classified that her mere presence at Vanguard represented a serious security concern. Cordova made a decision that would prove to be catastrophically poor judgment. He decided to confront Emma directly, to force the issue before higher command became involved. If she was legitimate, she'd have authorization to reveal herself when pressed. If she was a fraud, he'd expose her and claim credit for identifying the security breach. He found her at 2:30 in the afternoon, during the equipment inspection, working alone in the armory while other soldiers took their scheduled break. The room was quiet, filled with the smell of gun oil and metal, isolated enough for private conversation. Private Hayes, we need to Emma looked up from the rifle she was cleaning, her expression neutral. Sir, Cordova closed the door behind him, a gesture that immediately changed the dynamic from public interaction to private confrontation. I ran your background verification. Do you know what I found? No, I found nothing, or rather I found that your file is classified at a level I've never encountered before. He moved closer, invading her personal space in a way designed to intimidate. So here's what I think. Either you're impersonating someone with a classified background, which is a federal crime, or you're here under false pretenses for reasons you haven't disclosed. Either way, I want answers. Now, Emma stood slowly, setting down her cleaning cloth with deliberate care. Sir, my service record is accurate. If you have concerns about classification levels, that's above my authority to address. Don't play games with me, Private. Cordova's voice rose slightly. I've been at Vanguard for 3 years. I know every soldier who comes through here, and you're not standard infantry. You're something else. So you're going to tell me exactly what you're doing here, or I'm going to make your life very difficult. It was a threat that might have worked on an actual private, someone vulnerable to officer authority and career consequences. But Emma Hayes was neither of those things, and her response carried a subtle shift in tone that Cordova registered too late. Lieutenant, I suggest you step back and reconsider this conversation. I don't take suggestions from privates. He reached out to grab her arm, intending to physically emphasize his authority. What happened next occurred too fast for Cordova to fully process. Emma's hand moved in a blur, redirecting his grab into a joint lock that put immediate pressure on his elbow and shoulder. Not enough to injure, she had perfect control, but enough to make movement impossible without pain. Then she released him just as quickly and stepped back, returning to attention as though nothing had happened. "Sir, I recommend you leave." Cordova stared at her, his arm throbbing, his pride injured more than his body. The technique she just used wasn't taught in basic hand-to-hand combat training. It was advanced close-quarters combat, the kind taught to special operations personnel for neutralizing threats up close. "You just assaulted an officer," he said, but his voice carried uncertainty rather than conviction. "I defended myself against unauthorized physical contact, sir." "There's a difference." Emma's tone remained perfectly respectful, perfectly regulation, but the message underneath was clear. She wasn't playing by the same rules he thought governed this interaction. Cordova backed toward the door, his mind already working through how to spin this incident to his advantage. "This isn't over, Hayes, not by a long shot." He left and Emma returned to cleaning her rifle, but her hands, steady throughout the confrontation, trembled slightly now that she was alone. Cordova's background check had triggered exactly the kind of attention she'd hoped to avoid, and his confrontation suggested he'd keep pushing until something broke. The timeline had just accelerated. Speaking of equipment that performs when it matters most, military-grade technology has evolved dramatically from those rusty M16s. Modern operators now rely on advanced tactical communication systems with encrypted channels, rugged tablets that function in extreme temperatures from -40 to 130 degrees Fahrenheit, and night vision optics with thermal imaging capabilities that can identify targets at over 2,000 yards. The difference between outdated gear and cutting-edge technology can mean the difference between mission success and failure. When your life depends on your equipment, settling for good enough isn't an option. These specialized systems undergo rigorous testing in conditions far harsher than any civilian device would ever face. If you're feeling that tension building right now, wondering how this is all going to unfold, you're exactly where I want you to be. This story is about to take a turn that will leave everyone speechless. Make sure you're subscribed because we're just getting started. The best part, you haven't seen anything yet. What's coming next will blow your mind. By 4 o'clock, word of Cordova's confrontation with Emma had spread through informal channels. Details were vague. The armory had no security cameras and neither participant was talking. But the fact that something significant had occurred was confirmed by Cordova's visible agitation and Emma's continued calm. Sergeant Major Brennan called an emergency formation at 5 o'clock. All personnel from the advanced training cycle assembled in the main compound. 80-plus soldiers standing in perfect rows under the late afternoon sun. General Reeves stood on the observation deck, her presence transforming what would normally be a routine assembly into something far more significant. "Listen up," Brennan announced, his voice carrying across the formation. "Tomorrow morning, 800 hours, we're conducting a final evaluation exercise. This will be the most challenging drill you've faced at Vanguard. Live fire, complex scenario, multiple objective. Performance on this exercise will determine your placement for the next phase of training." He paused, his eyes scanning the formation until they found Emma. "And to make things interesting, we're implementing something new. Competitive team dynamic. Your performance will be evaluated not just on individual metrics, but on how you respond when competing directly against other teams for limited resources and time-sensitive objectives." It was deliberate targeting, another attempt to create conditions where Emma would either fail or reveal more of what she was hiding. Morrison, standing near Brennan, shifted uncomfortably. The parameters Brennan was describing violated standard training doctrine that emphasized cooperation over competition. Master Sergeant Drake, watching from his position near the rear of the formation, recognized the setup immediately. He'd seen variations of this during his own career. Commanders creating impossible situations to justify predetermined conclusions. If Hayes failed tomorrow, Brennan could claim she'd only succeeded before through luck. If she succeeded, he'd escalate further until something broke. The formation was dismissed, but the tension remained. Soldiers dispersed to prepare equipment and study tactical scenarios, their conversations filled with speculation about tomorrow's exercise. Emma returned to the armory to conduct final maintenance on her assigned weapon. She worked alone as usual, her hands moving through familiar motions while her mind calculated probabilities and contingencies. Cordova's confrontation had revealed the investigation into her background, which meant her cover was deteriorating faster than anticipated. Tomorrow's exercise would accelerate that deterioration further, forcing her to choose between maintaining pretense and completing her actual mission. The choice was already made. She'd come to Vanguard to identify the security leak, and all evidence pointed to Cordova, but she needed proof, concrete evidence that would hold up under official scrutiny, and that meant staying in position long enough to catch him in the act of transmitting classified information. She checked her weapon one final time, then secured it in the armory rack. As she turned to leave, Master Chief Harrison was standing in the doorway, having entered so quietly she hadn't heard him approach. That alone was significant. Very few people could surprise Emma Hayes. Private Hayes, Harrison said, his voice carrying the particular quality of someone who knows they're about to have a conversation that can't be official. Or should I use your actual rank? Emma remained motionless, calculating the implications of this confrontation. Harrison was a Navy SEAL, which meant his clearance level likely gave him access to information that most Army personnel couldn't access. If he knew who she really was, that changed the operational parameters significantly. I'm not sure what you mean, Master Chief. Harrison smiled slightly. I served alongside Task Force Black operators in Ramadi, 2007. Watched them work, learned their patterns. You move exactly like they did. Same footwork, same weapon transitions, same threat assessment patterns. He paused. There are maybe 200 people alive who move like that. Most of them are still actively deployed. A few are dead, and one or two are doing exactly what you're doing, operating undercover for reasons that stay classified. Emma made a decision. Harrison was either part of the problem or part of the solution, and she needed to know. If you're right about any of that, Master Chief, then you'd also know I can't confirm or deny anything you just said. I'm not asking you to confirm anything. I'm telling you that I recognize what you are, and I'm offering support if you need it. No questions, no reports, no complication. His expression was serious now, but I'm also warning you. Whatever you're doing here, it's attracting attention from people who shouldn't be noticing you. Lieutenant Cordova filed an incident report about your confrontation this afternoon. He's making noise about security concerns and unauthorized combat training. That was faster than Emma had anticipated. Thank you for the warning, Master Chief. One more thing. Harrison reached into his pocket and pulled out a challenge coin, a small metal disc that military units use to recognize membership or achievement. This one bore no unit designation, just a simple geometric pattern that Emma recognized immediately. I earned this in Ramadi. The operator who gave it to me said, only give it to someone who understands what it means. He held it out. I think you understand. Emma took the coin, feeling its weight in her palm. The geometric pattern matched the tattoo hidden beneath her uniform, the mark of Task Force Black Operator. I'll keep it safe, Master Chief. Harrison nodded and left without another word. Emma stood alone in the armory, holding a piece of metal that represented both recognition and warning. Her cover was thoroughly compromised, now visible to anyone who knew what to look for. Tomorrow's exercise would likely force complete revelation. She pocketed the coin and returned to the barracks to prepare for what would come. Night fell with its usual desert abruptness. Most soldiers slept fitfully, nervous about tomorrow's evaluation. Emma didn't sleep at all. Instead, she used the darkness to access areas of the base that would be difficult to explain during daylight hours. At 2:30 in the morning, she entered the communications building through a maintenance entrance that should have been locked but wasn't, a security vulnerability she'd identified during her first week at Vanguard. The building housed secure servers and transmission equipment, and more importantly, it housed activity logs that recorded every classified communication sent from the base. Emma had legitimate access to some of these systems through her official duties, but what she needed tonight required privileges several levels above a private's authorization. She'd been slowly accumulating access credentials over the past 3 weeks, piecing together passwords and security tokens from careless personnel and poorly secured workstations. 20 minutes of careful work gave her what she needed. Transmission logs showed that Lieutenant Cordova had been sending encrypted messages to an external address that, when traced through multiple proxies, terminated at a server associated with a private military contractor known to have connections to hostile intelligence service. The messages themselves were encrypted, but the pattern was unmistakable. Every time Vanguard conducted advanced training exercises, Cordova sent transmissions within 12 hours. He was feeding tactical information to someone outside the military command structure, Exactly the security leak Emma had been sent to identify. She documented everything with her phone camera, careful to include timestamps and authentication codes that would verify the evidence's legitimacy. Then she erased all traces of her access and departed the communications building as quietly as she'd entered. Mission accomplished. She had the proof she needed. Now she just had to survive tomorrow's exercise long enough to deliver it to proper authority. 8 o'clock arrived with Sergeant Major Brennan's voice booming across the assembly area. Form up, we're burning daylight. The final evaluation exercise was even more complex than anyone had anticipated. Teams of 4 would compete to complete a live-fire scenario that required breaching a fortified compound, extracting a simulated hostage, and evacuating under simulated enemy fire from multiple positions. Resources were deliberately limited: ammunition, time, and support assets, all rationed to create pressure. Emma was assigned to Fire Team Delta again, the reject squad, but this time paired with a twist. They'd be competing directly against Fire Team Alpha, led by Private Matthews, the same soldier who'd mocked her as beauty queen during their first encounter. The observation deck was more crowded than Emma had ever seen it. General Reeves occupied the prime viewing position, but she was joined now by officers Emma didn't recognize, senior personnel from other facilities who'd apparently been invited specifically to observe this exercise. Colonel Pierce was among them, having traveled from his distant office to witness in person what he'd been tracking via security feeds. When his eyes found Emma, he nodded once, a gesture so subtle that only someone watching for it would note it. The exercise began with both teams entering the compound from opposite sides. Standard doctrine would have suggested cooperation, but Brennan had specifically designed the parameters to force competition. Only one team could successfully extract the hostage within the time limit. Matthews's team moved with aggressive confidence, their approach loud and direct. They'd trained under Brennan's old-school methods: overwhelming force, maximum aggression, assumed dominance through superior violence of action. Emma's team moved like ghosts. She'd spent the previous night briefing Torres, Chen, and their other teammate on specific tactics not taught in standard infantry doctrine. They approached through angles that standard training would consider non-optimal, but that provided superior cover and concealment. Their movement was slower, but infinitely more controlled. The first obstacles were automated pop-up targets designed to simulate enemy sentries. Matthews's team engaged immediately, their rifle fire echoing across the compound. They hit their targets but used excessive ammunition, rounds wasted through rapid fire rather than controlled pairs. Emma's team waited. She'd identified something the others had missed. The automated targets appeared in patterns, not random sequence. By waiting 7 seconds, her team could engage during a gap in the appearance sequence and advance, while Matthews's team was still suppressing their sector. Morrison, watching from the observation deck, leaned forward. "She's reading the pattern." "How is she reading the pattern?" "We randomized the sequence." "It's not random," Webb said quietly beside him. "Look at the timing intervals. There's a 3-second processing lag in the system between target sets. Someone who's trained to read mechanical patterns would catch." "Someone who's trained to read mechanical patterns," Morrison repeated slowly. "That's not infantry training, that's intelligence analysis, threat assessment protocol." On the observation deck, the unidentified senior officers were taking notes with expressions that suggested they were seeing exactly what they'd come to observe. Emma's team reached the hostage location first, using their conserved ammunition and tactical positioning to outmaneuver Matthews's more aggressive approach. But the extraction presented a new problem. The hostage was a dummy weighted to simulate a wounded soldier, and the evacuation route required carrying 200 pounds through 200 yards of compound terrain, while under simulated fire from multiple directions. Standard procedure called for 2-person carries, but that would leave only 2 team members to provide covering fire, insufficient, given the simulated threat density. Emma made a decision that would later be analyzed in training doctrine revision. She created a modified diamond formation where 3 team members rotated through covering positions, while the 4th, her, carried the hostage alone. "That's impossible," Brennan said flatly, watching the tactical display. "A 1-person carry of that weight over that distance while maintaining situational awareness. She'll collapse halfway through."
But Emma didn't collapse. Her movement wasn't fast, but it was consistent, and her positioning kept her protected behind her team's suppressive fire. More importantly, her breathing never shifted from the controlled rhythm that marked experienced operators under stress. She wasn't straining, she was executing. Matthews's team reached the extraction point 10 seconds before Emma's team, but they'd used all their ammunition and half their members had been killed by hostile pop-ups. They'd failed to properly clear. According to the scoring system, they'd failed the mission despite reaching the objective first. Emma's team completed the extraction with 0 casualties, 15 rounds remaining, and a time that beat the facility's previous record by 42 seconds. Silence fell across the observation deck, then chaos. "Explain that," one of the unidentified officers demanded, pointing at the tactical display. "Explain how a standard infantry private just executed advanced special operations extraction protocol." Brennan had no explanation. Morrison had no explanation. The only people who weren't surprised were Colonel Pierce and Master Chief Harrison, both of whom watched with expressions that suggested they'd expected exactly this outcome. General Reeves descended from the observation deck with deliberate purpose, her boots striking each stair with finality. The crowd of observers parted automatically as she made her way toward the compound exit where Emma's team was emerging. "Private Hayes, remain in position. The rest of you, dismissed." Torres, Chen and the other team member departed reluctantly, leaving Emma standing alone at attention, still carrying the 200-pound dummy across her shoulders as though it weighed nothing. "Put that down, Private." Emma lowered the dummy with perfect control, no dropping or collapsing, just a smooth descent until it rested on the ground. Then she returned to attention, her breathing still perfectly regulated despite having just completed what should have been an exhausting physical effort. "Where did you learn those tactics?" Reeves asked directly. No preamble or diplomatic phrasing. "Standard infantry doctrine, ma'am. Don't insult my intelligence, Private. I've commanded combat operations for 15 years. What you just demonstrated was Tier 1 Special Operations Extraction Protocol. So I'll ask again, where did you learn it?" Emma met Reeves's eyes directly, a break from the downcast, regulation gaze she'd maintained for 3 weeks. "Ma'am, I'm not authorized to answer that question." The phrasing was critical. Not "I don't know" or "I can't remember," but specifically "not authorized," a phrase that carried very different implications. Reeves studied her for a long moment, then pulled out her phone and made a call. "This is Major General Reeves, Vanguard. I need immediate verification on Private Emma Hayes, currently assigned to my facility. Cross-reference with, yes, use whatever access you need. I'll wait." The conversation lasted 3 minutes, but those 3 minutes contained multiple moments where Reeves's expression shifted from certainty to confusion to something approaching shock. When she finally disconnected, she looked at Emma with completely different eyes. "Lieutenant Hayes, attention." Emma's posture shifted subtly but unmistakably from private to officer bearing. The change was so natural that it suggested the previous 3 weeks of subordinate behavior had been the performance, not this moment of revealed authority. "Lieutenant Commander Cordova has been detained," Reeves continued. "Military intelligence received evidence approximately 6:30 this morning of security breaches traced to his communications. I assume you know something about that evidence." "Yes, ma'am, and your presence at Vanguard." "An operational assignment, ma'am, classified under Joint Special Operations Command Authority." Reeves nodded slowly, pieces falling into place. "Lieutenant Emma Hayes, Task Force Black. Officially killed in action 3 years ago in Syria." The words carried across the now silent rain. Soldiers who'd been preparing for their own training evolutions stopped and stared. Officers on the observation deck froze mid-conversation. 80 witnesses heard the revelation simultaneously, and the implications spread like shockwaves through water. Brennan descended the observation deck stairs so fast he nearly tripped, his face contorted with disbelief, anger and something that might have been fear. "That's impossible. Task Force Black was completely eliminated. Every operator confirmed kill." "Not every operator," Colonel Pierce said, stepping forward to stand beside Reeves. "One survived. One was pulled from a compound that should have been empty but turned out to be a trap. One spent 6 months recovering from injuries that included 3 bullet wounds, a collapsed lung, and fractures to 14 bones." He looked at Emma. "One came back from the dead to hunt the people who'd betrayed her unit." Emma remained at attention, saying nothing, confirming nothing. but her silence carried more weight than any verbal confirmation could have. "Show them," Pierce said quietly. "They've earned the truth." Emma hesitated for only a moment. Then she reached back and lifted the edge of her uniform shirt, exposing her lower back. The tattoo was exactly as described in her file, a geometric eagle pattern in black ink. Wings spread 6 inches across her spine, talons gripping a shield bearing 3 stars. Numbers embedded within the design, TF Black 072, and below it all, in small precise letters, her call sign, Fent. The silence that followed was absolute. Not a single person on that range moved or spoke for 3 full seconds, an eternity in military time. Then Master Sergeant Drake, standing near the back of the crowd, removed his cover and held it over his heart. "I served with black operators in Kandahar, 2008. Lost 3 friends there. They saved my entire unit during an ambush we shouldn't have survived." His voice carried across the silence. "Ma'am, it's an honor." The gesture broke the paralysis. One by one, officers and enlisted personnel throughout the range came to attention. Colonel Pierce raised his hand in a formal salute, followed by Morrison, Webb, and dozens of others. Even Brennan, despite his visible struggle with the revelation, eventually brought his hand up in recognition of what Emma represented. General Reeves returned the salute with precision that carried 30 years of military service. "At ease, Lieutenant Hay." Emma lowered her shirt and returned to attention, but the damage or revelation was complete. Every person on that range now understood that the quiet private they'd dismissed, or mocked, or underestimated, for 3 weeks, was actually one of the most decorated soldiers in recent military history, operating under deep cover for a mission they still didn't fully understand. Captain Sterling emerged from the observation deck, her ice-blue eyes fixed on Emma with an expression that mixed shock with something approaching understanding. She approached slowly, then stopped directly in front of Emma and extended her hand, a gesture that violated protocol but carried far more significance than any salute. "I built my career by being harder than everyone else," Sterling said quietly. "I thought that was the only way. You showed me there's a different path." She paused. "Thank you." Emma shook her hand. Her response was minimal but genuine. "You earned your position, ma'am. Nothing about that changes." Private Matthews approached next, his earlier aggression completely gone. "Ma'am, I don't know what to say. I said things, I acted like." He trailed off, unable to find words adequate for the apology. "You acted like a soldier under stress," Emma replied. "We're good, Matthews," but she made no move to embrace forgiveness fully. No gesture that suggested past insults were completely forgotten. Justice had been served through revelation rather than revenge, which was perhaps more devastating to those who'd participated in her dismissal. Military service comes with unique financial challenges that most civilians never consider. Specialized financial planning services for active duty and veteran personnel address complex issues like deployment-related income fluctuations, VA benefit optimization, and strategic investment vehicles designed specifically for those who serve. Comprehensive life insurance policies tailored for high-risk occupations provide coverage levels that standard civilian policies simply cannot match. These financial instruments protect not just the service member, but their families during deployments and beyond. When you're putting your life on the line, your financial security deserves the same level of strategic planning as any military operation. Right now you're probably thinking you know where this is going. Trust me, you don't. What's about to be revealed will shock everyone on that base, and it's going to shock you too. If you want to see stories like this every single week, stories about people who refuse to stay invisible, hit that subscribe button now. You won't regret it. The next 72 hours brought cascading consequences that reshaped Vanguard's command structure and training protocols. Lieutenant Cordova was formally charged with unauthorized disclosure of classified information and conspiracy with foreign intelligence services. The evidence Emma had gathered during her 2:30 a.m. visit to the communications building proved irrefutable. He'd been selling tactical training information to a private military contractor with known ties to hostile nations, compromising not just Vanguard operations but multiple facilities using similar training protocols. His arrest led to 12 additional detentions across 4 military installations, unraveling a network that had been active for 7 years.
The investigation revealed that Cordova's motivation had been purely financial. He'd accumulated over $300,000 in payments with no ideological component, just greed enabled by opportunity and insufficient oversight. Sergeant Major Brennan received an official reprimand from General Reeves personally. "Your conduct toward Lieutenant Hayes was not just unprofessional," Reeves told him in a meeting attended by multiple witnesses. "It was a systematic attempt to undermine a classified operation through personal bias. You're being removed from training command effective immediately." Brennan accepted the judgment in silence, but his departure from Vanguard carried no ceremony or recognition of his previous service. He'd earned that outcome through choices that privileged prejudice over professionalism. Morrison approached Emma 3 days after the revelation with a formal request. "Ma'am, I've compiled everything you taught Private Gonzalez during your morning sessions. Would you review it for a training manual revision? Your techniques are demonstrably superior to our current doctrine." Emma agreed, and over the following week she worked with Morrison to create what would eventually be designated the Phantom Protocol, advanced tactical training that integrated special operations methodology with standard infantry instruction. The manual remained classified but would be distributed to every advanced training facility in the U.S. military. Danny Torres and Alex Chen were promoted to team leader positions, their performance under Emma's guidance having exceeded every measurable standard. They'd gone from reject squad to facility exemplars in 3 weeks, a transformation that suggested the problem had never been their capability but rather the instruction they'd received. Sterling requested a private meeting with Emma in week 4. They met in Sterling's office, away from observation and official record. "I need to apologize," Sterling began without preamble, "not just for dismissing you specifically, but for the entire framework I used to justify my career. I thought being the only woman meant I had to reject anything that looked like asking for accommodation or acknowledgement of difference. I see now that was just internalizing the same bias I was fighting against." Emma's response was characteristically direct. "You survived in an environment designed to break you. That required strategies that worked at the time. But environments change and strategies should adapt. Will you help me adapt?" Sterling asked. "Not just personally, but systematically. We need people who understand both the current culture and where it needs to go." "That's above my pay grade, ma'am." Sterling smiled slightly. "Actually, I checked with General Reeves. Your actual rank is lieutenant, not private, which makes us peers for purposes of policy development." She slid a folder across the desk. "JSOC has authorized your reassignment as senior instructor. 2-year commitment, full authority to redesign training protocols. You interested?" Emma opened the folder, scanning the authorization document. Everything was official, properly classified, signed by people whose clearance levels made General Reeves look junior. "I need to complete my current mission first. Cordova's network. There are secondary contacts still unidentified. 3 more facilities potentially compromised." Sterling nodded. "Then take the assignment. Use Vanguard as home base while you complete the investigation. Best of both worlds." Emma considered for a moment, then extended her hand. Transitioning from military service to civilian life requires specialized education and legal guidance that standard programs don't provide. Advanced certification courses in tactical operations, intelligence analysis, and specialized combat training can translate military experience into high-demand civilian security career. Legal services specializing in military justice, security clearance issues, and veteran benefits claims provide critical support when navigating complex regulation. Educational benefits like the GI Bill can be maximized through strategic planning, covering not just traditional degrees but also specialized technical training that commands 6-figure salaries in private sector security consulting roles. The story you just witnessed is real. These moments happen every day in our military, where excellence hides in plain sight until the moment demands it. If you want more stories of hidden heroes, of people who changed the game when everyone counted them out, this channel delivers every single. Subscribe now and never miss a story of redemption and justice. 6 weeks after the revelation, on a Tuesday morning at 6 o'clock, Emma stood alone on the range where Brennan had first thrown that rusted M16 at her feet. The rifle sat beside her, now fully restored to pristine condition, through hours of careful maintenance. She'd kept it as a reminder and a symbol. Excellence doesn't require perfect conditions, it creates them. Her encrypted phone buzzed with an incoming call. No caller ID, but she recognized the number from previous operations. Hayes, Lieutenant, this is Colonel Marcus, JSOC Operations. We've identified 3 more facilities with potential security breaches matching Cordova's network. Fort Carson, Colorado is priority 1. We need someone who can go deep cover, assess from inside. Emma looked at the restored rifle, then across the range where her students, she had 12 now, all volunteers were beginning to arrive from morning instruction. Torres waved. Gonzalez jogged toward her with visible enthusiasm. Chen was setting up target systems with Morrison's guidance. Timeline, 2 weeks for current obligations, then immediate deployment. Different base, different identity. High risk, high priority. Emma was quiet for 3 seconds, calculating. The work at Vanguard was incomplete, but sustainable without her direct involvement. The network Cordova had been part of was larger than one facility, and each breach meant American lives at risk. The choice was already made before the question was asked. I'll be ready. Outstanding. Briefing packet will arrive via secure courier tomorrow. Welcome back to operational status, Lieutenant. The call disconnected. Emma stood holding the phone, watching her students prepare for training that would make them better soldiers, watching the facility transform from a place that had tried to break her into a place she'd fundamentally reshaped. Torres jogged up, slightly breathless. Ma'am, we're ready when you are. Also, where are you going? The rumor is you got reassigned. Emma smiled, a rare expression that transformed her usually neutral features. I'm not going anywhere, Torres, not for 2 more weeks. She picked up the restored rifle. After that we'll see. But before the official departure came an unofficial ceremony. Master Sergeant Drake organized what he called a recognition dinner at the base facility. Attendance was technically voluntary, but actually mandatory for anyone who wanted to acknowledge what Emma had done. General Reeves presented Emma with an official commendation that would remain classified but existed in a permanent record for extraordinary service in identifying and neutralizing security threats, while maintaining operational security under extreme circumstances, demonstrating the highest standards of tactical excellence and personal integrity. Master Chief Harrison gave her a second challenge coin, this one bearing no markings at all, just blank metal that somehow carried more meaning than any insignia could. For the operators who can't be acknowledged, he said quietly. So they know someone remembers. And when the formal part ended and the informal conversations began, Emma found herself surrounded by soldiers who dismissed her, mocked her, underestimated her, and now wanted to thank her or apologize, or just understand how she'd maintained composure through 3 weeks of systematic dismissal. She handled each conversation with the same minimal grace that characterized everything about her. Brief, genuine, focused on moving forward rather than dwelling on past injustice. Near midnight, as the gathering dispersed, Danny Torres caught her alone near the parking area. Ma'am, can I ask you something personal? Go ahead. The tattoo, the numbers. TF Black 072, what do they mean? Emma was quiet for a long moment, looking up at the desert sky, where stars shone with impossible clarity. Task Force Black had 73 operators over its operational history. The 72 before me are all gone, every single one. She looked at Torres. The numbers are so. I remember them, so someone remembers them. Torres absorbed this with visible emotion. You're not planning to come back from wherever you're going, are you? I always plan to come back, Torres. Doesn't mean it works out that way. Then take this. He pulled something from his pocket, a small metal cross on a chain, worn smooth from years of handling. My grandfather carried it through Vietnam, my father through Desert Storm. I carried it through my first deployment. It's supposed to protect the bearer. He pressed it into her hand. You've protected enough people. Let something protect you for a change. Emma held the cross, feeling the weight of 3 generations of faith and service. Torres, I can't. Yes, you can. That's an order, man. From your first student to his instructor. He smiled. Besides, gives you a reason to come back to return it. Emma pocketed the cross without further argument. Thank you, Torres. 2 weeks later at 5:30 on a Thursday morning, Emma stood in front of her assembled students one final time. They'd known this moment was coming, but knowledge didn't make it easier. You're ready, she told them simply. You've all exceeded every standard. Trust your train, trust each other, and remember, excellence doesn't require recognition, it requires commitment. Morrison stepped forward with something wrapped in cloth. From all of us, man. He unwrapped it to reveal the rusted M16, now fully restored and mounted on a display plaque, with a simple inscription: "When everyone doubted, one soldier proved excellence needs no perfect conditions." Emma accepted it with genuine gratitude. "I'll keep it safe. You better come back to retrieve it properly," Gonzalez said, her voice thick with emotion. "That's an order from your second student." "I'll do my best, Private." The transport helicopter landed at 6 o'clock exactly. Emma boarded with a single duffel bag that contained everything she needed for an identity she hadn't assumed yet. As the aircraft lifted off, she looked down at Vanguard one final time. The range where she'd shattered records, the compound where she'd revealed herself, the facility she'd fundamentally changed, simply by being excellent when everyone expected her to fail. The helicopter banked east toward Fort Carson, and whatever waited there. Emma settled into her seat, pulled out the challenge coin Harrison had given her, and allowed herself one moment of reflection, before compartmentalizing everything for the mission ahead. Some warriors never retire, they just change battlefield. The helicopter climbed higher, Emma's silhouette visible against the dawn sky, a serial number faintly visible on the fuselage. TF Black Fan. Then the aircraft turned and disappeared into the sunrise, carrying a ghost operator toward the next mission, the next identity, the next moment when someone would underestimate her and learn the same lesson Vanguard had learned: excellence doesn't advertise, it simply performs when called. And Lieutenant Emma Phantom Hayes would keep performing until every security threat was neutralized, every fallen teammate was honored, and every soldier who deserved better training received it. The ghost was operational again, and somewhere in the desert behind her, a restored rifle stood in a training office, waiting for the day when its owner would return to claim it properly. Some promises are made to be kept. Some warriors refuse to stay buried, and some stories continue long after the telling ends.